Hello folks, well, besides that, I'm just looking through old advertisements from the 1950s or 1960s. Well, once again, have you heard of companies falling and down? Well, I still have seen that now that I'm looking through this thing of Sony's downfall or something like that. This is main thing about how this company has succeeded and how this company have or the guy that knew about that brought Sony through us. I mean, Keto or Akira, whatever, you know, about his name, I forgot the guy who founded Sony, but I'll look for it. I'm in the computer. So, is this thing takes too long, you know, after this takes too long. After I'm saying this, is that before I can get through through how did Sony started or how did this company started, it is so. And let's not talk about the TV industry and the electronics industry in general. Well, the first thing is that TV was an invention. It was invented here in the United States around the 1950s, around the 1940s. But Sony was not the first company that came out with the TV. Not even Samsung that came out with the TV. At the time, it was one US based company, and that company nowadays, what it was called back then, it was called Victor. They used to make record players. Besides, when they made record players, you know, they made record players, you know, I think, and there were the first company. I know that it was thanks to the invention to Edison. The Edison company never made TVs or anything like that. That company that made the TV came out with this patent. You know, the record player. You know, the famous dog Nipper, and then they added Chipper later on, but it was called RCA. It was called RCA Victor at the time. Anyway, they were the first company that made TVs. And that company was the top leading manufacturer in the TV industry back in the day when the TV first started. You know, there were all other rivalries. There was Zenith. There was Admiral, and there was Westinghouse and other companies that made TVs back in the day, but nobody could lay a finger on RCA because they made the best TVs ever in that era. From the 1960s to the 1950s through the 1960s, and beyond that, before I get to what Sony first came out. after all, it's loading in. After all, the computer's loading in. I'm just looking out for Google. Sometimes I forget things and stuff. You know. Probably if you could remember, it's when Sony first came out. When Sony first came out, it came out making transistor radios. They never made TVs yet. They never made TVs. So everybody, you know, everybody had an RCA TV majority because it was like, it was the market leader at the time before Sony came out with TVs. Even though I'm a proud owner of a Sony TV, they still make good TVs, but still competition is being fierce and fiercer, and you know, this is why I could tell you where to get to the change the box of the computer. Even though I'm holding my phone, but the phone has phones nowadays has a camera. But you know, this is I'm using one of Sony's mainest competitor from nowadays. You know, that's definitely is what it is. And I'll tell you what is this. When Sony came out in the market, you know, even though was whatever you folks know about this, about the JVC brand, the JVC brand was actually started as a company owned by RCA. It was Japan's version of RCA, what it is back then. RCA back in the 1950s, they came out with Japan's first TV. Even Japan had RCA TVs. It was the #1 brand in the industry, and that's I mean, if is Victor company of Japan, it is RCA Victor. Does JVC ring a bell to some of you? It is what it is. Black and white TV before color came out. You know, talking about Panasonic and stuff, but you know, that was just back in the 1950s and 60s. Black and white television ruled the world, and that was like, yeah, it was awesome. You know, black and white TV. Color TV, on the other hand, didn't came out a little bit later. And this is where this company that came out with the TVs, even Zenith came up with the remote control TV. You know, thanks a lot. Kudos to them. They came out with the remote control, right? But sometimes how these US based companies, the first companies that they were the leaders of the TV industry back then, being bought by foreign competitors, and sometimes these foreign competitors, you know, aren't like it is, you know. But after all, even the people having their Magnavox TVs, RCA and Zenith TVs, RCA and Zenith were the two best-selling brands of TVs back in the day, and it is, and they were, but back in the day, when in the infancy of TV, the golden age of television, we all remember that. Do you remember the golden age? Sure, we all do remember. That's when TVs has kept on selling. In every household there is a TV, a black and white TV, and it came out with sizes, and the largest size is 21 inch. This, like I see in the 1960s. Yeah, I mean, on YouTube, from one of the commercials from the 1960s, when color TV came out. When the color TV came out, you know, early in late 1950s, early 1960s, I think RCA was outsold themselves with a bunch of TVs back in the day. It is, but still, but after all, you know, back then, and when Sony first came out, they never made a TV until later on. You know, they made small TVs before they got into this. There were transistor radios, and man, would you imagine cheap transistor radios? You know, some are made in the US, but mostly are from Japan. And Sony has made a bunch of transistor radios back in the day, and this is where Sony entered the market for the first time when RCA ruled the world. Back then, in the television industry, in the electronics industry, RCA and Zenith were the two main, you know, are the two top dogs from back in the day when Sony first came out. That's it is. Sony didn't make TVs. It started with transistor radios, and it was the thing before the dawn of what it is of cheap, affordable Japanese imports, affordable, good quality products from Japan that is just from half the price for what our Americans made stuff as worth for the same quality. You know, this is one story that I could tell you where Sony starts and Sony has begins its life's form, and I tell you who it is, and I tell you, well, the founders of that company is Akio Morita is one of them, and Masaru Ibuka. Well, they started in Tokyo, you know, but their main product that Sony came out was transistor radios. You know, back then when Sony first came in the scene, you know, RCA was the leader in that time. Then later on, when they came out with TVs, you know, the magic thing is when the Trinitron came out back in like in the 1970s, pardon, late 60s, early 70s. Even though it was just a tough challenge, you have Panasonic, you have Sharp back then, but RCA was the main leader on that time. But after all, once they came up with the Trinitron, you know, Sony step up and say, hey, we could make good TVs. This is what it is. This is what it meant, the flourish or the leadership of the Japanese industry in the electronics era. You know, you have so many various companies. You got Pioneer and Stereos and whatsoever, right? But the main thing for the fall, or let me tell you, back then it was like a fierce competition. How the heck you gonna do back then? Well, it was after all, when the era of inventing how the next generation of television is gonna come out, high definition and all that stuff. Well, back in that time, the RCA Corporation, you know, the first company, they were developing something about high definition and all that stuff back in the day, way before that. But around 1988, RCA was sold to a French French corporation. Even though everything you find in the net nowadays, you know, how amazing is that? Since they sold to a French corporation, but way back then, you know, before they go on and see that they look for other Asian countries, well, Taiwan was making their own industry, beginning from one major US company. So it is what it is, and then they bring out TVs from Taiwan and all that stuff. And then this is where Korean third-party companies came in the line out of the blue. Like these third-party companies came out with, like, probably General Electric bought the RCA brand back in '86 before they sell it to a French company called Thomson back in 1988. Well, it is what it is. So after these companies came out of the blue, just two of these third-party companies are now like the big household names now. And Apple, talking about Apple just started with computers. You know, Apple never made a TV set yet, but then again, here we go, what it is. After they didn't knew about fierce competition about these competitors, well, they should have knew that these people who have probably fired from the crew, you know, one of the main US competitors has been bought by a Korean company. You heard of Zenith, right? They sold to LG, what was back then known as Gold Star. It is what it is. You know, cheap collaborative third-party company now is being a household name. But this is where is going on with Sony's downfall. Back then when Sony came out with the Walkman, everybody has bought the Walkman. If it ain't for the Walkman, we never have an iPod or the MP3 player that's actually invented by the former parent company of this well-known US brand. You know, with the Lyra, but Apple just stood up. What Apple has done with the MP3 player, what Sony did with the TV. So Apple has come up with the iPod. Simple and plain simple as that. Then iPod ruled the world of the MP3 player industry. Now the phones. And then this is where it goes to me talking about one major US company that is now major nowadays. Well, that is what it is. Sony's downfall has resulted to lack of marketing and lack of which company they're investing into. You know, they have one thing to have something that really have to do about that. This is where it is. Instead of competing against a US rivalry, they'll go ahead and compete against Warner Brothers. For what? You know, movie studios. Warner Brothers. Can you imagine that? Well, they bought Columbia Pictures. And this was Sony in one of the main investment. And then this is where it goes to have a stupid American style management. RCA back in the day, if they have never sold their revenue to some company that didn't care for jack, they sold their revenue. This French company should have sold their revenue to the RCA branch to a Japanese company, sold it to Sony. And then this is why I don't agree with this kind of free trades with some certain countries. I do agree that the US should make a free trade with Japan, but this is what I'm saying, that if Sony wants to be number one and everything else, you know, get all these crew, get all these, you know, at least the US has to do free trade agreement with Japan. You know, as this is what I did on the JAFTA videos before I just strictly, I don't know what I'm talking about Sony, you know, I have a Sony product, is that the main crew from back in the day, from the first company that started making TVs, known as RCA, you know, even JVC now is made by a Taiwanese company now in their in their TVs, even though they're sold to Kenwood in the audio part, but to a Taiwanese company on the television's part. You know, it is what it is, but this is all the mess where it goes, that once a US brand, RCA, had a factory in Taiwan and they have contaminated. This is like Sony has to clean up this mess in the first place, because this is where it goes, and this is why in the first place is that when a company has seek of, you know, not giving up stuff, you know, they already give up, you know, there's companies that give up some division. You know, Sony is known for their brand name, and this is where it is, and not to invest in anything, but you know, the whole crew of what it is, what was the RCA Corporation, from all the way from the beginning to 1988, when they just, you know, get bought by a French company. Then what happened is Sony could even buy the JVC division from Kenwood and just start over and kill the JVC brand. Why? Because RCA was the first company that started JVC. Then that's what it is. I'm glad when they come up with when Sony came up with the Blu-ray format, it killed the HD DVD, since RCA came out with the VHS VCR. It was troublesome for Sony back in the day. It was, you know. And now what it is what they need to do is, it is what it is. I heard of this company called Element that brought TV manufacturing back to the United States. Yeah, like since TV production has shifted from the US to Japan to Mexico and to Taiwan also. Well, what this company has done is just assembling TVs. Element is not well known. And now there's VAIO. VAIO, on the other hand, is another US manufacturer that is giving Sony a run for its money. VAIO TVs has been selling like hotcakes for a while. Now that what it is what is the most important thing about it's not because Element is just making it in the USA. What about the people making it, or the quality control? This is where you have a new Sony getting another brand that is just, you know, fading out, is just forgotten in history, because it is what it is. The first company that made TVs. Well, since what Sony would do, or what this thing will do if you have a TPP or this kind of thing trade, it is to still hold on investment in development, get the crew, what is all the old paperwork from the old RCA company, even development of HD TVs, you know, like you have curved TVs and everything, have all this thing and bring up some of what I have left off, what, you know, the RCA Corporation wants to lead back in the television industry and the electronics industry and everything, and come up with this idea and buy the brand. It's just no more, like, you know, come up with some strategic naming that Sony could not sell themselves as Sony, but sell themselves with another company, come on developing and stuff, and then Sony in Japan will sell it in Japan as Sony before they come here, before they sell it here. It is that reopen up, reshape the economy, reopen a factory in Bloomington, Indiana, and this is where it is. This is where Sony could sponsor a NASCAR race called the Sony 500 in Indianapolis, Indiana. This is where one of the former companies, a brand where they used to start as a company back then. You know, Sony has killed the Iowa brand, but this time it might have to kill the JVC brand, because that brand, that company known as RCA, back then when it was a company, it was a brand and a company that, you know, was a Sony. What Sony did, but back then, back in the 50s, RCA was what is called Apple or Samsung or LG or something, you know. Well, and all they do is when they invested and come up with this strategy and sell it, okay, this is what is this? This is the RCA like they used to be, but you know, that would be held up that Sony could come up little by little their true colors. Well, Sony could come up little by little by buying the RCA brand, because I know what it is, hanging up the crew or doing the old paperwork and stuff. And as I bet you, once or at least before too late, when Apple starts, and you know, this is where it goes, right? Sony come up with the PlayStation game console, and then with the PlayStation game console will come from 1, 2, 3, and now 4. There's really a big competition right there. I played it and I seen it. Yeah, there's nothing like the Xbox One. Now Sony right there is facing tough situation, and I think the Xbox One will outsell the Sony PS4. So I think this better act fast, and I know what it is. You know, doing a free trade with the US, doing free trade with Japan and stuff. Is just like everything is falling like the rivers of Babylon. Y'all left out or whatever it is. Once what it is like, here comes up, and like here comes up some brand from China or something, or like same thing with the auto industry. Hyundai is outselling Toyota, for instance. That's just an example. One thing it is that someday Hyundai will be the #1 auto manufacturer in the world, surpassing Toyota, surpassing GM in a way. Other than that, I might just say that this is one of the longest videos I've done. That like if Sony could keep up their work up and just be #1, what it is like people in Washington, Taiwan, and stuff. You heard of the Thomson Taiwan story when RCA put a factory in Taiwan? Now imagine if Sony has bought that brand and they clean up that mess. So it will be great that I think that if they just sue the people, the managers from RCA, instead of just saying covering up when they was bought it from that French company and they never have done any jack about it, and environmental protection and the EPA. And then that'll be like Sony will stand by them, and then they say, yes, we're gonna clean up all the mess, and please people don't just say, oh yeah, Sony ain't gonna do jack, they're just gonna keep the money and say, oh, this thing never happened in Thomson, Taiwan. You know, you're just gonna talk shit about the Japanese folks, even companies. Well, let me tell you what. A US-based company, a brand that is from a US company, has sold their royalty to a French-based company, right? So all of you out there that you want to blame, or I'm talking about this, and I'm talking about whatever happened. Let me tell you something. I would like to defend this and whatever it is to all you people that want to talk crap about Japan and its companies. Conrad Murray never killed Michael Jackson. A Korean doctor did kill Michael Jackson. Yeah, and that is true. It's all set him up. They drug his ass and just to make the other guy famous. You know who I'm talking about, right? So whatever it is, just to talk about that way to your level, only to the people that want to diss Japan, then I would say go ahead, make my day. Make my day. Let a struggling company buy a US company, and I know what this US company has been bought, a leading brand in there, clean up the mess in Thomson, Taiwan. That way you just talking about is you stop talking crap and then just get along. That's it. Anyways, this is what Sony should do, or this is what I'm saying they should do, is to take action instead of going or like what I said. If I was that company, I'm gonna sell these company. Well, let's give it to the Japanese, and then actually Sony. And that way, I think I'm saying, well, let them progress, and just like everybody else could progress, so could you. Time to think and realize all these things. Whatever it happens. So goodbye and peace out.